Well, no, it can be muted on volume.
Ashley, we have 1 minute to go.
I start playing the video now.
Yes, I think so. Professor,
Okay.
you already?
Okay. Let me just make sure that attendees are all muted so that it doesn't affect the sound.
Okay. Okay. I think Professor looks ready.
Thank you, Kyle.
Ashley, I think you can play the video now. Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning, everybody. I'm so sorry. What we'll do, the Vice Chancellor could not be here in person, so we are playing a recorded introduction.
Hello, everyone. I'm Professor Mamkgetsi Phakeng, the Vice Chancellor of the University of Cape Town. On behalf of UCT Winter School, I welcome you to this very timely webinar titled The Constitution and Social Justice, Why You Should Care, delivered by Professor Thuli Madonsela. The annual winter and summer school programs are open to everyone. You don't need any kind of qualification to participate. This is our way of embracing the wider community beyond our campuses. And now that winter school is offered online, that community extends around the world, including alumni and friends across Africa and on other continents, NGOs and community organizations who can benefit from listening to experts provide the most recent insights into their respective fields of knowledge. You are each a part of the UCT community, and I welcome you all. Before anybody ever heard of COVID-19, the digital technology of the fourth industrial revolution was already disrupting how we banked, how we shopped, booked travel and entertainment, to name just a few. And UCT decided early on that we would embrace disruption by taking the initiative to transform of thinking, our pattern of being and our pattern of doing. We want to create leaders who will be able to channel the coming changes for the good of South Africa and other African nations. The transformative purpose we have committed to is unleash human potential to create a fair and just society. The South African Constitution was written with a similar purpose in mind. It speaks of establishing a society based on democratic values, social justice, and fundamental human rights. improving the quality of life of all citizens, and freeing the potential of each person. COVID-19, poverty, and inequality, climate change, gender-based violence, Black Lives Matter. These are just a few global symptoms of humanity's need to change how we think about and behave towards each other. Our democratic republic was created to open the way for South Africans to contribute to the transformation the world needs. Today, we are privileged to hear from one of the people who helped draft the final constitution of South Africa back in 1996. Professor Thuli Madonsela also helped draft several laws that help to anchor our democratic principles, including, among others, the Promotion of Equality and Prevention of Unfair Discrimination Act, the Employment Equity Act, and the Recognition of Customary Marriages Act. She served as our public protector from 2009 to 2016. And today, as chair for social justice in the law faculty at the University of Stellenbosch, she conducts and coordinates social justice research, teaches constitutional and administrative law, and continues to advocate for ethical governance in public institutions and for public administration that is accountable, transparent, and responsive to people's needs. Her work and influence have been recognized around the world. Thuli, thank you so much for joining us today. I hand over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for the wonderful introduction by the Vice Chancellor of UCT, Professor Phakeng. And thank you for this privilege, to UCT for this privilege to present this course. Dear colleagues, you've already heard about me. What maybe you don't know about me also is I was a trade unionist, and that exposed me to a quest for social justice at an early age. And that, to a certain extent, shaped my belief in the importance of social justice in our time. Now, I want to engage you today primarily on the Constitution and what messages it has for me and you on social justice. The second part of my engagement with you is why should you care and why should I care? Right. I hope you can see the presentation. Can you?
Yes, we can see the presentation.
Okay, I just am sorry about that. I was battling to make it easy to read. Okay, I apologize about that. Let's start with a few years ago when the famous Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg was asked by an Egyptian journalist if she would recommend the American Constitution as a template to be used by the Egyptians to reframe their constitution in the aftermath of what got to be referred to as the Arab Spring. Justice Ginsburg said no, she would not recommend the US Constitution. She would recommend the South African Constitution because it's a visionary constitution that covers all bases. Indeed, our Constitution has been celebrated by the entire world as a groundbreaking, visionary blueprint for a society. The question that arises as we speak today is, what does that constitution look like? And why would Justice Ginsburg recommend it? In S versus Makwanyane, Justice Mahomet gave us a glimpse into what is so special about the South African Constitution. He said that ordinarily constitutions restate what's happening. If, for example, right now you're a member of a stokvel, of a society, or of an association, you'd find that the constitutions of those associations, they pretty much standard, just restating how we should, what the structure should look like, how people should behave, and how we should treat each other. And if people do wrong, how will we make sure that we correct them? And Justice Ismail Mohammed reminded us that ours is a constitution that is a blueprint for building a new society and moving away from the society that created that very same constitution. In other words, it's a transformative constitution. It's a blueprint for transforming the society into a different one. And he did indicate that at the core of that society is a society that embraces the humanity of everyone, an egalitarian society that is founded on the supremacy of the Constitution. You'll find that that message that indicates that our Constitution was not there to affirm the status quo, but to become a blueprint to transform our society into an egalitarian one. That message is repeated in several cases decided by the Constitutional Court. Among those cases is Minister of Finance versus Van Heerden, where Justice Moseneke went further to say that if the Constitution is not used as a touchstone for every decision to make sure that whatever we make creates a more equal society, then we are not going to be able to achieve the society envisaged in the Constitution, and that the Constitution itself would not be worth the paper it is written on. Justice Froneman, Justice Madlanga, and Justice Cameron repeat the message of transformative constitutionalism in the land rights case of Daniels versus Scribante. And we see this message running across a whole lot of cases that have transformed the landscape for women who are historical victims of patriarchy. We've seen the same constitution transform societal infrastructure for people with disabilities. We've seen this constitution being used for HIV to transform the landscape so that we respond better to HIV. The Constitution has been used for socioeconomic rights, and the Constitution has also been used to make the society more level for the LGBTQI community. And at the core of this Constitution is the Preamble. As the VC mentioned, the Preamble is very clear about the vision of the society this Constitution is the foundation for. It says in part, we, the people of South Africa, recognize the injustices of our past, believe that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, united in our diversity. We therefore, through our freely elected representatives, adopt this Constitution as the supreme law of the Republic, so as to heal the divisions of the past and establish a society based on democratic values, social justice, and fundamental human rights. And the Constitution further defines the basic citizen entitlements, and you'll find these in Chapter 2, which is the Bill of Rights. I want you to note there Section 25, which is about property rights, recognizing existing property rights, but also recognizing the need to redefine those property rights to ensure that those who are deprived of property rights under apartheid are not stuck in that socio-economic inequality, and that the state then adopts measures to level the playing field. We see in Section 27, the Constitution they protect socioeconomic rights such as the right to food, water, and social security, etc. You will see the Constitution underscore the right to education. But what I think is important for today in a conversation about social justice and the Constitution, why should you and I care? I want us to look at the equality duty in the Constitution, which is Section 9.2, read with Section 7.2 and the Preamble. Section 9.2 says, well, Section 9 basically protects the right to equality. And Section 9.2 says equality means equal enjoyment of all rights and freedoms. And then in Section 7.2, it enjoins the state to adopt measures to advance and protect these human rights, which means the right to equality, for example, which is about equal enjoyment of all human rights, is subject to the injunction in Section 7.2, where the state has a duty to make this right accessible to everyone. But in the UK is called the equality duty. The United Kingdom does not have a constitution, or at least it doesn't have a written constitution, but it has an amazing Equality Act that was introduced in 2010. And in that, there is an equality duty. And that equality duty enjoins the state, whenever it takes action, whatever action the state is taking, it must make sure that that action does not disadvantage the protected groups, which would be women, people, minority groups, people with disabilities, etc., or people also disadvantaged through religion. It has now also added people who are gender unassigned. It also requires not just to make sure you don't disadvantage them or further disadvantage, it requires any new action to make sure that it reduces inequality for these groups. My reading of our Constitution, even though it's not as specific as Section 149 of the UK Equality Act, is that it requires the same, that whenever action is taken, number one, make sure that you do not exacerbate existing inequalities, particularly for groups that were deliberately targeted for disadvantage during colonialism and apartheid. You also, as the state, have a duty to adopt measures to advance equality. And you'll see that message is included in our Equality Act, or is taken forward in our Equality. That's the basic entitlements in our Constitution, which are entitlements for everyone, regardless of your race, color, or creed. Then the structure of the state is such that power is decentralized in a polycentric way. So there's power sharing, there is the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. It even includes Chapter 9, where you find the Public Protector, which I headed for 7 years. And the Chapter 9 is one of innovative institutions that President Mandela once said about even the most benevolent of governments have within them the propensity for human failings. And that's why we've had this kind of constitution that makes sure that the people are never at a loss when their rights are violated, that there's always a structure that can remedy the injustice. And he indicates that in this constitution, we've included in innovative structures such as the Constitutional Court, the Public Protector, and the Human Rights Commission, among others, as additional accountability mechanisms. So that's the structure of the Constitution. And that structure also ensures that there is accountability. Everyone is accountable in different ways, and nobody is above the law, because the Constitution entrenches the supremacy of the Constitution and the rule of law as part of our founding values in Section 1. And our founding values also include the value of equality, the value of achieving equality, and the value of human dignity. And I want us to pause for a moment to understand, why would the Constitution entrench the value of achieving equality instead of just entrenching the value of equality. It's because the Constitution understood, or the architects of our Constitution understood, just that by having this great Constitution, you would not necessarily be magically transformed into an egalitarian society. The Constitution would have to be used as a blueprint to build a new society. In the same way that if you have a Motorola cell phone, and then somebody gives you a blueprint to transform it into an iPhone, you can't just use your Motorola. You can't just use your Motorola iPhone. I mean, you can't just use your Motorola phone and then hope that magically it will be transformed into an iPhone just because you have a new blueprint. But also, even if you do transform your Motorola phone into an iPhone using the blueprint, you would still have to then now learn how to use the new functions of the iPhone to add value. I'm giving you an example of this because I have had an iPhone for the last 10 years or so. But a whole lot of things that I do are pretty much the things I used to do when I still had my first cell phone, which was a Nokia at the time when cell phones arrived in South Africa. And people often laugh at me on Twitter, especially when I take photos, to say, are you using a Motorola, Prof? And then they note that actually the phone, the photo was taken with a cell phone, with an iPhone. And then they realize that I do not know how to optimize my usage of the iPhone. Same thing with the Constitution. We had a particular situation in our society. The Constitution gave us a new blueprint, as Ismail Mohammed told us, and these other justices told us. And I think even Justice Arthur Chaskalson writes about it in his article on transformative constitutionalism. But the Constitution gave us a new blueprint to move from where we were to where we wanted to be based on the vision of that Constitution. And then the last thing in the Constitution that is important is that the Constitution also specifies the character of the state that will move us from the society we were to the kind of socially just society that the Constitution wants us to become. Section 96 talks about the ethical foundations of executive actions, which includes avoiding a conflict of interest. It also includes not advantaging yourself or somebody as you exercise your state power. Section 136 applies to the MECs in the provinces and premiers. Section 195 applies to everyone who works for the state, and it says they should operate on the basis of the highest professional ethics. And Section 237 says we should put constitutional responsibilities first. So if Justice Ginsburg was saying Egyptians should copy us, I think she was right, because we have a constitution for all seasons, a constitution that gives us a blueprint of what kind of society do we want to become, what kind of state can carry this duty, what values should make sure that we do this, and when things wrong, what accountability mechanisms should kick in, and those are polycentric accountability mechanisms. And it also does say it is the supreme law of the land, nothing is above it, and the courts, with the Constitutional Court as the apex court, are the ultimate guardians of the constitutions. Then the question that arises as we sit here in July 2021 is, who moved our cheese? I hope many of you have read this book, Who Moved My Cheese, by Spencer Johnson. If you haven't, please read it. It's a fantastic little book about confronting sudden change, or what looks like sudden change, even though it wasn't sudden change. And it talks about two ways people can respond. Some can respond by saying, who moved our cheese, which was the response of the people in this little book. And the mice, on the other hand, didn't ask who moved the cheese. They went to look for better cheese and they found cheese. The humans, one of the humans eventually does leave. The other one stays hemmed in because he doesn't think that it's just that the cheese has been moved, and he hopes that whoever moved his cheese is going to bring the cheese, and the cheese never comes back. In the second book by the same guy, Spencer Johnson, which is called Out of the Maze, Ham, who was hemmed in, suddenly realizes that he's going to die of hunger if he keeps asking who moved his cheese. He better go out and find cheese. And when he doesn't find cheese, he is guided by hope to find alternatives to cheese. And I think we're finding ourselves in the same situation. COVID-19 is the greatest disruption of our time. People speak about our time being the time, the VUCA time, which is we're living in volatile times when there's so much volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. I personally think people have always lived with VUCA. Life has always been volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Think about those who had to run away from saber-toothed tigers, whose DNA we carry today. Think about wars that people had to fight, epidemics that came. Even this epidemic, we think that it just came and it was unforeseen. The truth is it was foreseen. There were signs that at some stage, as we become globalized, as we become so integrated, when something happens in China or in Iceland, it will affect people in South Africa and in Antarctica. We recently had Zuma riots. Some of us have been saying this is going to happen. A friend of mine just sent me a note that I sent him in June. And in this note, I had warned that I am worried that I am worried. I'm going to just read it a little bit later when you have questions. But I was just warned that I'm worried that we're not doing enough to respond to hunger and anger, and that pretty soon political entrepreneurs who have a different axe to grind are going to use people's anger and hunger as their fodder, and we're going to see riots. And I think when I said this, we hadn't even seen what had happened in Swaziland. And look what happened when former President Zuma was incarcerated. People were able to use that and gaslight people and link this to people's concerns. And they knew that when you are hungry and angry, anything but the status quo is worth trying. Why was it possible to have these kinds of riots? And why was it possible for us as a country to be hit so hard by COVID-19? Look at the US, it has grown by more than 6%, I think 6.5% during this period, during COVID. On the other hand, our economy has shrunk on top of the fact that we had already become the most unequal society in the entire world. So what were the things that existed before the Zuma riots and before COVID-19? Youth unemployment at 70%. Poverty, if you're looking at the higher bound poverty, at 55.5%. Lower bound poverty put the figure at about 30%. But if we're talking lower bound poverty, we're looking at people in a household earning about 560 rand a month. That's what we call the food poverty line. But me and you know that poverty is not just about the ability to have food. It's about the ability to have clothes, to have blankets in winter, to have the ability to be able to buy electricity, the ability to access education, just the ability to live with human dignity as promised by Section 1 of our Constitution. That's why I prefer, as Statistics South Africa does, to look at poverty from the upper bound, which are the figures that I've given you, 55.5% across national groups. But if you disaggregate it by race, you will find that poverty among white people is at 1%. This was before COVID-19. Among the Indian community at about 6%, colored community 40%. Among those classified by law as African, 64.2%. You're talking about almost about 2 in 3 people that you meet, 2 are poor. But if you look at poverty within the provinces, it gets worse. The last time I checked from Statistics South Africa, in the Eastern Cape, poverty was at about 70%. So we are talking about those, that was the powder keg for dynamite that existed before COVID-19, before the Zuma riots. We also had an economy where 10% of the people in this country, no, the 1% in this country that own the resources, own more than 50% of the wealth of this country. And the majority own very little wealth. Okay, so people ask, if people were hungry, why were people looting fridges and things like that? I mean, they were looting those things to sell them. And then the question is, why didn't the Eastern Cape rise up? Why didn't the Eastern Cape rise up? Given the fact that it's the poorest province. Limpopo is also one of the poorest provinces. Why did it not rise? That's my next point, is you're talking about hope disrupted. In some of these provinces, Gauteng and KZN, you will see that based on the research and on the investigations that I did as PUB protector and that many people were also doing, you will find that in those provinces, there were a lot of patronage pathways. Those in power had created pathways for entering the middle class through tenders, through a very tight patronage system. So when we spoke about Dawn, when we spoke about rebuilding South Africa and clutching it out of the hands of state capture, those patronage pathways were disrupted. But as we're disrupting the patronage pathways, we have not created better pathways for entering the middle class, legitimate pathways. The problems of the past remain with us, as Judge Edwin Cameron says in Daniels versus Kribante. So what happened in the past, and why is that responsible in part for what happened with the Zuma riots? In the past, land was taken away from Black people. Jobs were taken away from Black people after the 1932 Carnegie report on white poverty. A wrong decision was taken by Carnegie on the advice of the report drafters that the poorest white person should be richer than the richest Black person. So to get white people out of poverty, the decision was made to sacrifice Black people. So then we get job reservation. We get land dispossession. We get Black people being denied the right to own land. And you get many laws, master and servant laws, where you're forced to work for someone. And if you don't work for that person, you're caught having run away from work, you are arrested for deserting a job. So as Verwoerd said, he decided to permanently proletarize Black people. So that what happened is that if you look at what then happens in New South Africa, what we inherited is what Steve Biko said. Steve Biko says said the following about 44 years ago. There's no running away from the fact that now in South Africa, there's such an ill distribution of wealth that any form of political freedom which does not touch on the proper distribution of wealth will be meaningless. The whites have locked up within a small minority of themselves the greater proportion of the country's wealth. If we have a mere change of face of those governing positions, what is likely to happen is that black people will continue to be poor, and you will see a few blacks filtering through into the so-called bourgeoisie. Our society will be run almost as of yesterday. So for the meaningful change to appear, there needs to be an attempt at reorganizing the whole economic pattern and economic policies within this particular country. It's like in a monopoly game where you have a blue team and a pink team, and you decide that at a given stage of this game, you're going to kick out the pink team and say, out of the game. And two, take away their land, whatever they had bought. And then allow the blue team to play for as long as possible, build itself hotels and everything that people build on a monopoly game. And later you decide that this is not just and this is not fair. Let the team go back, the pink team go back to the game. But you don't reset the game. If you don't reset the game, no matter how hard the pink team plays, no matter how educated it becomes on how to play the game, it will always fall foul because the blue team become gatekeepers. If you look at, for example, in a monopoly game, if you land in a hotel, you have to pay. If you look at real life, if you want to buy property, you need some kind of security or collateral. If you have land, you'll use your land as collateral. If you have no land, you're not going to be able to loot it. So you get a black middle class that is always a paycheck away from poverty because it doesn't have an anchoring in wealth. So what did the post-apartheid government do? It introduced BEE. It introduced also a pension for parliamentarians. The case that I cited for you, which is Minister of Finance versus Van Heerden. So what it did exactly what Steve Biko predicted, that a few blacks will jump into the so-called bourgeoisie, which was through BEE. And for parliamentarians, they also made sure that they give themselves a little bit of a nest for themselves. But what happens to Gogo Dlamini? What happens to Palisa Musa, who, when we met in 2017 at a Tuma Democracy Festival, Palisa Musa said, I don't want this democracy because I fought for freedom. I was arrested at the age of 12 as a child and incarcerated. And in the process, my education was arrested. I was a soldier. But here am I working hard, coming to the Constitutional Court, Constitution Hill every day to talk to people about what happened to us and to sell my cheap cosmetics. I am still poor. I don't want this democracy. I prefer the freedom we fought for. So why is this so? It's we didn't do what Steve Biko said. A proper reset that makes sure that there's something for everyone in all of the municipalities. And what then has this done is people then used political patronage to get into the middle class. Even BEE was mostly political economic empowerment. Look at even the very first vehicle of BEE, the one that had Dr. Ntato Motlanthe and not Motlanthe, man, Dr. Ntato, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the name. But that nail vehicle, it was called nail. That was the first one. The people were chosen because of their political profiles. And therefore, what was done was to try and suck the black middle class into the protected space, but not realizing that there'll be millions and millions of people, that even though that black middle class could, through patronage, spread some of the crumbs to a few people, this vehicle could never satisfy the whole of South Africa. So this is what happened. And I know that it was not intentional. At some stage, I was in government too. I never protested against BEE. I thought it was a great idea. But with hindsight, I do realize that there were many problems. Also, it can't grow the economy, because if you're saying government is going to pay from taxpayer money through the NEF or the IDC, some money for somebody to buy into Standard Bank, to buy into Anglo-American, to buy somewhere, you're not growing the cake. You're just growing the pockets of those who are already in those systems. If you look at what happened after 1932 to address white poverty, they didn't get the Afrikaners into vehicles that were owned by the English people. They got Afrikaners to have their own vehicle. That's why we have ABSAs today. That's why we have the Rand Merchant Bank today, and all of these Afrikaner businesses. So I'm not against integration by getting into existing vehicles, but if we are going to have an economy that yields an egalitarian society, we need more vehicles. So why should you and I care? You probably already know the answer is, Adam Smith said many years ago that justice is the fabric, is the glue that holds society together. And in the absence of justice, society is bound to disintegrate like atoms. And social justice is a form of justice. And in plural society, the greatest form of justice is social justice. That is justice between groups. That you shouldn't have better chances in life because you are black, or better chances in life because you're white, better chances in life because you're a man, or better chances in life because you are a woman. A social justice framework, as John Rawls said in 1971 already, is a framework where there's fairness to all, where there's a level playing field, where the social goods of society accrue evenly to everyone. And our Constitution then gave us a blueprint to transform the unequal social relations of the past, to build new social relations where those who were born into poverty under apartheid are not condemned for generations into that poverty. So one of the mistakes that was done, for example, is an emphasis on jobs for those who were victims of apartheid. Jobs are here today and gone tomorrow. You have to create a vehicle for people to be able to create jobs for themselves. You have to dismantle Verwoerd's theory of change. Verwoerd's theory of change was dislodge the Charlotte Maxeke, the Pixley Kasemes from the ability to own their own means of production and make them permanent job seekers. So the new society can't answer inequality by making people permanent job seekers. I mean, we've seen under COVID-19, those jobs that were created purely to give people a chance were the first to go. And that includes yes jobs. That includes some of the extended public works jobs in government. They are gone. I mean, some of the Zuma foundations who have just joined us were employed here in Stellenbosch, where I am, and those jobs were dispensable and they've been cut. So the answer lies in making sure there are as many people as possible that are creators of jobs, and that they create jobs that solve the challenges of our time. So firstly, it's an issue of justice. And because as long as there's injustice somewhere, there can't be sustainable peace anywhere. And Prof. Ramos from Harvard just gave us an example of how Hitler's Germany was possible as opposed to Italy's Renaissance. In Hitler's Germany, after people suffered from the First World War, nothing was changed in terms of the economic formula. In Italy, after a pandemic, they went for the arts, for education, for the Renaissance, and hope was built. In Hitler's Germany, after the First World War, they tried to rebuild economically as had been done before. And then what happened? Something similar to the Zuma pandemic. Those Germans who felt like Hitler, who felt they were entitled to part of the cake and they couldn't get part of the cake, found the majority who were excluded from the economy and from the socio-economic center and harvested their pain and anger. And what was born was Hitler's Holocaust and the killing of millions and millions of Jews. Rwanda, the same thing. So it's not just the working class, it's not just the poor people that create pseudo-revolutions or even real revolutions like the first French revolutions. It is the combination of the disaffected middle class and the poor that create that combination for a revolution. And I did predict that we're going to get something like the Zuma. And it's not over. You cannot suppress the fight for justice through law and order. Law and order is not sufficient. Yes, we need law and order, and I'm grateful that civil society stood up against the looting. But to permanently stop ourselves from being looted in the future, we need to deal with social justice. And the answer lies from one farmer who was asked, why are you successful? Why do you win this competition, this farming competition, year after year? And this farmer said, it's easy. I give my best seeds to my neighbors. And this journalist asked, why would you give your best seeds to your neighbors? They are your competitors. And the farmer said, we are in the same ecosystem. If they have poor crop, weak crop, that weak crop is going to cross-pollinate with my crop, and I wouldn't get this best crop that I have. And I think the UN Global Compact thinks the same. The United Nations, in terms of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, thinks the same, that if we invest in each other, if we invest in everyone, economically, we'll do better. But also, that's our insurance for peace. So at Stellenbosch University, being part of the solution, we're suggesting that to rebuild better together in the reset for COVID-19, in the reset after 27 years of democracy, let us undertake a Marshall Plan for social justice, although we call it a Musa Plan for social justice. It's similar to the post-World War II Marshall Plan that was introduced by America when 2 to 3 years after the Second World War, it was clear that Europe was not going to be able to rebuild speedily on its own, and that what had happened could happen again. Another world war could happen. So they came up with this Marshall Plan, and we are trying to do the same. It has 4 key impact areas or key result areas. One is social justice conscious policies and laws. Instead of just passing laws randomly and not thinking about, will that exacerbate inequality or will they improve equality? We are giving society, we're giving government an instrument that is called social justice impact assessment matrix. It's similar to Section 149 of the UK Equality Act. Ask yourself, will this exacerbate inequality for the protected groups? Will this improve equality in broader society across the 17 indicators of equality in Section 9 of the Constitution, which are the grounds for discrimination? And we're saying, every time you pass a new law, a policy, or even a plan, ask yourself, what would be the systemic impact of this? Will it reduce inequality? Will it improve equality? And then that means, of course, planning with disaggregated data. I've seen municipal data. It doesn't deal with gender. It doesn't deal with race. It doesn't disaggregate in terms of disability, age, etc. How then do you make sure that the services you provide respond to each group? How do you make sure that the services you provide do not further push certain groups outside the equality grid? And that's what has happened with COVID-19. As we see, some economies have grown in the midst of COVID-19 because of disaggregated planning. With us, people would be pushed off the grid, and only after we had complained as civil society, we start thinking, oh, this is going to be bad for township economy. This is going to be bad for food security. This is going to be bad for transport for people who are not driving their own cars. This is going to be bad for people who are not on the internet. And education, a whole lot of students have discontinued their education. A whole lot of basic education attendants or learners have left the education system because when we passed those regulations, we didn't think about impact. When we decided to close preschools, we didn't think about what does it mean for mothers who don't have a support system. So we're saying in future, use this. And if, of course, this is the only way you can move forward, you can't move forward without exacerbating inequality, have a compensation strategy. And a compensation strategy, for example, now with government, are these packages that are seeking to make sure that those who have been dislodged get some economic support. But we're saying provide that packet for support at the very same time as you are introducing the new law or the new policy. Not after people have been thrown off the grid and then you try to pick them up, because some are not going to come back. Some of the businesses that have died will never, ever come back. So in future, we have to make sure that the compensation strategy is introduced exactly at the same time when we introduce a law that is going to exacerbate existing inequality. The second key result area is social accountability and social cohesion. That's where me and you can play a role. One is just about cultivating active citizenship. Let's teach each other about everyday justice. Let's teach each other about the preamble. We've started a process of teaching people about the preamble so that we all understand that we're building a new society and that we need to disrupt inherited unequal power relations. We also are about promoting social cohesion, because one of the things these political entrepreneurs whose patronage pathways have been disrupted, they're now mining racial polarization. Exactly the way it happened in Germany, exactly the way it happened in Rwanda. You are poor, not because I stole from you. You are poor because these people stole from you long ago, which is true, of course. Poverty, a lot of poverty is due to the legacy of apartheid, and Daniels versus Kribante does remind us of that, as does Minister of Finance versus van der Heerden. But in 27 years of democracy, we would have done more to disrupt this inequality had we been more conscious, more impact conscious when implementing our policies. So social accountability, social accountability is also going to be about us now working with each other to find out, how does the state operate? Where does money go to? Instead of finding out years later that a bridge that was supposed to be built was not built, but somebody was paid, we must insist on transparency so that we can monitor. If a bridge is supposed to be built, after 10% of the time, there should be 10% of the structure showing, and et cetera, so that we can stop the rot before it is too late. Same thing with state capture. When we know who got the tender, we need to know who is related to who. For example, I mean, President Zuma says we shouldn't have had the State Capture Commission. One of the reasons we needed with the State Capture Commission was, why is it that the Gupta fired the president's son? And then only when President Zuma became a president of the ANC, suddenly the son was made a director. And all of the tenders, all of the funding that the Zuma Gupta-owned companies got because of BE, because President Zuma's son was meant to be South African. And is this the way things should be done? Should people get funding? Should people get contracts because they employ sons and daughters of people in government or wives of people in government? And if so, what then happens to the Koko Dlaminis who don't have somebody in government? Resource mobilization, me and you can make sure that we use a little bit of money to contribute to the Plan for Social Justice. So we'll be asking for 5 Rand in the malls, minimum of 5 Rand in supermarkets for you to contribute to this. This money was needed even before COVID-19, but it's needed far more now in COVID-19. And the idea is to invest in infrastructure in all of the wards, 4,392 wards. For example, I look here in Stellenbosch where I live, I marvel at the number of dams that are here in this community. Imagine if, as part of the social justice Plan money, we built a dam in every village, a community center in every village. We made sure that each school has toilets, each school has computers. I am shocked at how many schools don't have libraries, how many schools don't have labs, and yet the Constitution promises to free the potential of every person. How is it possible to have? How is it possible to have your potential freed if you are going into a school that doesn't teach mathematics, a school that doesn't have a laboratory, a school that doesn't have a library, a school that doesn't have decent public toilets, a community that doesn't have bridges for you to go to school, a community that doesn't have water, and therefore you have to spend part of your time after school and before school collecting water. How can we say we have a level playing field that frees the potential of every person and improves the quality of life of every person? How could we say that we're moving towards that socially just society that the preamble promises? We believe, as Americans did after the Second World War, that this job of leveling the playing field can't be governments alone. Me, you, and everyone else should be part of the solution. And lastly, we also are about encouraging leadership among all and making sure that everyone understands that to achieve the society of our dreams, each one of us has to lead. And has to lead in an ethical way, purpose-driven way, impact-conscious way, and in a manner that is committed to serve everyone. And what do we mean by leading? Each one of us have to influence and inspire ourselves and others to think in a way that embraces social justice and to act in a way that embraces social justice. So that is level the playing field, abandon corruption, abandon state capture, and ensure that the rule of law is taken care of. So what am I proposing? 5 things. We all need to agree on the legacy of apartheid and the need to reset and stop the denial and saying to improve things, we just need to give people jobs. Jobs are not enough. Education is not enough, although it's important. That's why we have action for inclusion, to make sure no one is kicked out of university when they don't have fees. We need to connect our lives. A lot of you in this room are already doing great work to advance social justice. But what we're asking is that you connect those lives. For example, Dr. Beatrix V, who has been running her own foundation, she reached out to us at Stellenbosch University to say, let's work together, and may her soul rest in peace. She passed away at the age of 91 about 2 days ago. But at the age of 91, she still had fire in her belly about creating an egalitarian society, creating a society that embraces the humanity of everyone, because she understood that as long as there's injustice somewhere, there can't be sustainable peace anywhere. We also need to make sure that we level the 4IR playing field. A lot of young people don't have digital devices. So if you have an extra cell phone, an extra laptop, please make it available to the Tuma Foundation. They're collecting these to make sure. Data is a problem. Yesterday, Tuma, or 2 days ago, Tuma was running a workshop on agility and resilience for businesses in Kamandi. Some people couldn't attend because they didn't have data. Let's see how we can level the playing field in terms of access to data. Then there are people in faraway, such as Kimberley and in the deep rural areas where there is no connectivity. Let's make sure that we join our hands to extend connectivity. Then we also need to transform the culture. One of the tragedies of apartheid is that we've all been wired to believe in white supremacy, male supremacy, heterosexual supremacy, and in disability inferiority. We all need to rewire ourselves to make sure that we don't judge people based on what colonialism, apartheid, patriarchy, and other injustices told us. And this is an unlearning process because everyone is tainted. And some of the racism, sexism, and heterosexual preferences are not done deliberately. It is what we call unconscious bias. When we believe certain people, and when we evaluate people, we evaluate certain people as more competent than others because of our unconscious biases. We need to deal with all of this because that's going to create social cohesion. And lastly, what I spoke about aligning policy and legislation to our equality outcomes. What I do believe, though, just going forward, is that there is a glimmer of hope. We have the best constitution in the world, which I am comparing to an iPhone. But if we learn how to use this constitution to transform power relations, and we all play our part in delivering the society envisaged and promised in that constitution, we can move better in the next 5 years and 10 years than we did in the last 27 years. Because failure can be a great teacher if you're a good student. It can cultivate wisdom, and the challenge of justice between groups is a 21st century reality. And so there is the need for context-aligned and agile education to make sure that we all understand what we need to do. But the people who can make a difference are you, me, and everyone else. And I do know that you're already making a difference. Just by being in this room says to me that you're somebody who is committed to social justice, because social justice is our insurance for peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. I will now see if there are any questions and comments. If you have a question to the audience, you can indicate your question in one of two ways. You can put your hand up, use the raise hand icon, or you can just put a comment in the chat. I'm just scrolling. Okay. There is a comment from Dave Porter. Shall I just read it out? It's quite long. It says the final draft of our constitution had an opening sentence, quote, "in humble submission to Almighty God," unquote, which was then removed. He has two questions. One, any comment on this and where the guiding transcendent values for our constitution then come from? I wonder if you should want to answer that one before I go to question two.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, dear colleagues, and thank you, colleague David, for asking that question. I cannot recall offhand what the final draft looked like, but I do recall that during the constitution drafting process, there were different schools of thought about where should we place religion. There were those who felt that religion can be an antidote to a human rights culture, or anathema to a human rights culture, and there were those that thought that we should retain some kind of allegiance to God. The constitution that we have does put God at the center of our country. And I say this with maximum confidence, because once when I was public protector, we were starting our meeting with a prayer or meditation, whatever a person chose. And somebody right in the middle of the prayer stopped us and said, we have a secular constitution. And I was able to say to this colleague, not exactly. We just borrow things from other countries about a secular constitution. Our constitution is not entirely secular. This constitution says, at the end of that constitution, may God protect our people. Nkosi sigeleli Africa, murena buluka sichaba sahesi, etc., etc. And therefore, this constitution does recognize God as a singular God. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. And Dave's second question, any comment on the fact that the Western Cape Constitution does have this opening sentence?
Right. The Western Cape Constitution, I'm not sure that it has its own constitution. We have only one constitution because
yes,
we're not a federal state in South Africa. We're a semi-federal, and that was a deliberate choice we made because we needed to rebuild South Africa into an egalitarian society, and a federal state would have made it difficult to move in unison towards the society promised in the Constitution, being a society that is based on democratic values, social justice, and fundamental human rights.
Thank you, Professor, for responding to that. I'm just looking at the any hands up.
There was somebody's hand that was up, dear colleague. I don't see it, no.
Yeah, I'm looking. I also don't see a hand up.
I think it was Deliwe.
Oh, okay. Deliwe, do you
Deliwe
want to
Ngwenya.
answer your question? Deliwe? Is she unmuted, Ashley?
I allowed her mic, but I think she's still muted on the side.
Deliwe, do you want to pose your question? If you can unmute yourself by clicking the microphone item, if it's not. I think she may have changed her mind about the question.
Oh, yeah, she just exited the meeting.
Oh, okay.
People struggle with connectivity, and the system often kicks people out. I've seen that in our webinars.
Professor, I wonder if I may abuse my position here as a moderator. While people are thinking of questions, there's something that's always bothered me. I was also part of the administrative staff in 1995-96. I worked on the theme committee for the Bill of Rights. My job was to take minutes of the theme committee meetings. When I think about the Department of Basic Education, I cannot help but think that it's just another term for the old Department of Bantu Education. That basic, what the South African present government has done, they've just reintroduced Bantu education in a new guise. Why must the vast majority of poor people be subjected just to basic education? Why can't the quality of education in the early stages, primary and high school, be of a quality that should the Constitution, because I remember there was a debate about whether we must make it obligatory on the part of the government, and clauses were written in where it is reasonably, I mean, I've got my copyright here, where it is reasonably possible for the state to introduce. But effectively, the Department of Basic Education, in my view, is nothing else but the old Department of Bantu Education. And you might as well replace it with what, because they provide the quality and level of education that is being provided for poor people in this country. You know, it's very similar. I mean, why did we call the Department of Education Department of Basic Education? And it's so that the state can, sorry, I'm going off a bit on this because it's really something very close to my mind, but I'm abusing my position as moderator. I'm supposed to give other people. But I just thought to get discussion going while people are thinking and formulating their questions.
Dear colleague, you're not abusing your position, because I have found that in a meeting, often when people are struggling to formulate their questions, when somebody starts by asking a question among the leaders of the meeting, it opens other people's ideas on which areas to discuss. You are right about basic education. Having elements of Bantu education. And part of it, ma'am, or colleague Zuleika, is that there was no reset. There's been a reset in terms of saying people should not be excluded. In other words, a lot of it has been about, okay, let's make sure that people are accommodated in schools that are close to them. And I think that's a great thing that was done with education. But if you look at the South African Schools Act, it federalized education in a country where poverty was federalized. If you look at how people were parceled into townships, people were parceled into homelands, and those townships and homelands were deprived of economic and social development. So when you federalize, you are locking people into those enclaves where they were frozen by apartheid. And now a school in Kayamandi, for example, is now dependent on a school governing board in Kayamandi in terms of resources, in terms of leadership. And it says to me, not everything that is done overseas must be borrowed. We saw the same thing happen with health, where hospitals were regraded and communities, resources were pulled away from communities because they were maximized in certain centers. But what it then didn't take into account were distances. That now you'll have to find that people in Uppington have to travel for 400 kilometers to give birth when the water is already broken. And yet you're supposed to meet your Millennium Development Goals initially, and now Sustainable Development Goals, of making sure that there's no maternal or child mortality. What how we refer to this is that it's lack of systems thinking and impact consciousness in policy design. And what we are going to have to do is to look at what has been the impact of the past on various aspects of education and how do we rebuild. I'm not saying we haven't rebuilt, but the very fact that the number of schools that don't teach maths keeps growing, it's unconstitutional. It is honestly unconstitutional. We need one child to see the government for having a school in their area that doesn't teach maths. Because you're saying to this child up front, it doesn't matter that your brain is as huge as Einstein's. You're not going to be a doctor. You're not going to be an engineer. You're not going to be in any of the STEM opportunities. How can that be constitutional? So, but that's me at this stage blaming government. But this conversation today is about why should you and I care? So at Stellenbosch University, we're saying this is wrong from government, but is there something you can do? We know that Partners for Possibilities under Louis van Rijn is doing something. They, like you, me and you, are unhappy with the way things are, but they think, as Professor Reumer said, is that civil society can do more than point out to wrongdoing. Civil society can create models that can show government how it can be done. And I think with this education, what has emerged now just during these riots is a consideration of creating something like City Year. They've got this thing that, well, because I studied in Swaziland, they had these volunteers from America as part of City Years. If people can fund graduates to go and teach mathematics in all schools, and government should just decree that no school should have a situation where it doesn't offer mathematics. And we as civil society can make sure that there's libraries. The chairperson of our law trust, which is Mr. Otto, his daughter, who is discharging, like me and you, the burden of privilege, has decided her contribution to society should be to build libraries in schools that don't have. And I know that Shout Out also does the same, and I see a whole lot of other young people in Soweto doing the same, building libraries in schools, because we can wait for government to do these things. It's not going to do it. And I'm going to give you an example of what happened to us now in Kilimanjaro. On our first day on our ride to Kilimanjaro, we were on a bus, and then my colleague Amanda requested a stopover, a pee break, so to speak. And then other women joined her. But because of her kindness, she then allowed these other women to use the bathroom before her. They used the bathroom, quickly went back to the bus, and the bus left. And it left Amanda all by herself. So we are the bus, we are government, isn't it? We have a duty to make sure that everyone is on the bus. We have a duty not to leave anyone behind. And the normal way to do that is to do a head count before you move. So, but we left her, we went. And then after traveling miles and miles, we discovered Mandy was missing and we went back. But what did Mandy do? That is civil society for you. Mandy discovered the bus was gone, and there she was, white, blonde woman, got on the scooter, you know, those East African scooters? She got on the scooter and there she came. So we met her halfway. And I think civil society should do like Amanda. Even though you feel you have been wronged by being left behind, but roll up your sleeve and mitigate your situation. Right, colleagues. Deliwe came back. Do you want to ask that question, dear colleague Deliwe?
Deliwe?
I am fine for now, Prof. Thank you.
Sorry, Deliwa, could you please switch on your microphone?
I think she is possibly struggling with the. We did hear now.
Yes, we do.
The microphone icon is at the top in your control bar, right next to the video camera icon. Not sure. Oh, could you please either just type in your question in the chat if possible?
Right.
There is another question in the chat while we're waiting.
Yes, ma'am.
Pat, oh sorry, not Pat. I'm gonna have difficulty pronouncing the name. It sounds Chinese to me. Pei Yin, excuse me, apologies for mispronunciation. Pei Yin Librich asks, should we think about a solidarity tax?
Thank you, Payan. I was speaking to a friend of mine who's much richer than me, and he wasn't very keen on wealth tax. I personally think so. I mean, at the beginning of this year, to kickstart energy on the Action for Inclusion, I paid my own 27,000 rand for my salary. The Solidarity Fund in South Africa already said to people they could pay a third of their salary, and people have paid into that. And therefore, I do think that we should consider just a once-off tax. I do like that idea of a solidarity tax, because we do need just a pool of money that can give us a critical mass in leveling the playing field. For example, just the fact that there are children without libraries. There are children without bridges. There are communities without dams. Emanzimeleni, a community in KZN with vast amounts of farming land, they're not able to farm because of drought. But if we built them dams, that would be problem solved, food security solved. And if they win, like that farmer said, we all win, because our ecosystem becomes more vibrant. It has actually been found that the most high performing economies in the world are those that have a lower Gini coefficient. So this tax could reduce a little bit of that Gini coefficient, especially if it's once off. I don't think it's harmful, but I don't know what do other people think in the world. In this room. I mean, Professor Ramos, Harvard Professor Ramos, who spoke to us now recently, gave us a lecture on education and social justice. He was very adamant that if we want peace, we'll have to pay for it by advancing justice. And that in plural societies, the most critical and the most violated form of justice is social justice. In other words, group justice. That certain groups just feel that it's harder for them to survive, and then they become resentful, and then they lose their interest in ensuring the survival of the society and its institutions.
I'm just looking at if there are any other chats or questions. Just a comment, if I may make, on this solidarity tax, just to get discussion flowing. A solidarity tax to me seems like almost a voluntary thing, whereas surely if there's a need for this money, shouldn't it be made legally? Well, if we call it a solidarity tax, it sounds like it's voluntary, and if it's necessary, should we just not call it what it is, a wealth tax, that those who are very, very wealthy and have a lot far beyond what they require should be taxed? And if it's I'm not sure if, well, I don't know what Payin's comment is, but yeah, just to encourage discussion.
Thank you, colleague Zuleika. I don't know. It would be interesting to get thoughts from the room on solidarity tax, but we do need some kind of restitutive fund. So in the M plan for social justice, we've made it voluntary, but we get supermarkets to allow anybody who wants to donate. But we've seen in the US, there's various restitutive measures that have emerged over the years to look at restitution for slaves. For example, at Georgetown University, when I was there to deliver the O.R. Tambo annual lecture, they had just had the students vote to pay more fees. So the students decided themselves to pay more fees than required, so that a percentage of the fees that they pay could go to provide free education to descendants of slaves that were sold in order to keep Georgetown University afloat.
Okay, thank you for that. Let me just see if there are any more questions.
Deliwe's hand is up again, ma'am.
Oh, okay. Yes, you can pose your question, Deliwe.
Thank you. Apologies for earlier on. I had connected to an external speaker and I couldn't. You couldn't hear me. I disconnected it. I wanted to ask, in relation to the fact that I'm of the view that government is collecting quite a bit of money through the different taxes to be able to provide, infrastructure upgrade, infrastructure services and education services. And at the end of the day, yes, the needs on the ground probably surpasses the money that's on the basket. And you have, the different spheres of government working together to be able to provide those services. But I'm of the view that even with the limited funding that is available, the money, when it gets on the ground, it's not equivalent to what is within the basket. Perhaps local government, like municipalities, are provided a lot of autonomy in a manner that maybe proper oversight from provincial and national government it's not in place. Hence, you find there's exacerbated issue of corruption, predominantly in local government, also in other government spheres such as provincial and national. And also you find that the community's right to public participation is stifled. That's where we are supposed to participate the most at local government level. So I don't know if, is it a matter that the funding is there, but it's not being put into use effectively? And what can we do? What can an ordinary person do at local government to ensure that your local municipality do what it's supposed to do at that local government, at municipal level?
Amazing. What a wonderful, wonderful question, Deliwe. And that's a question we get a lot of times when we speak about the local government plan. People are saying, why do we need extra revenue when the existing revenue could cover more than it is covering? And you are absolutely right. And that's where part of our role as civil society may be to assist government to distribute the existing revenue better. Normally, the Minister of Finance asks us for ideas, and then I don't think we've had a group, a civil society think tank that can take that revenue distribution right now and think about the next one and say, we think you can distribute it better, because you are right, Deliwe, that the existing money has never been distributed equitably. I gave you an example of Minister of Finance versus Van Heeren, which means parliamentarians could set aside more money for themselves. That whole dispute was about a pension fund that was only for people who joined government after apartheid. And with a higher state contribution in order to level the playing field between MPs who were in government before 1994, which means although a Senec says leaders should eat last, in our case, leaders ate first. They ate first in terms of Minister of Finance versus Van Heeren. They ate first in terms of BEE. They can now start thinking differently about how do we distribute the money in such a way that no child goes to a school that doesn't have a laboratory, that doesn't have a proper toilets, that doesn't have a computer lab, that doesn't have bridges to school, and no village should be without it. So if we distribute the government revenue, we can then see how far can it go. Of course, it would mean scaling down on some of the things that government pays for, because the pool itself is not growing. It's a question of reprioritizing and then putting more money into ways that give a better life or improve the quality of life for everyone, but also improve South Africa's chances as a whole ecosystem in terms of developing. And I think one area where we can intervene as civil society is the SDG agenda, getting South Africa to leverage the SDGs to plan better for an economy that is inclusive and an economy that frees the potential of every person, as the VC of UCT said earlier. Local government could play a better role. We recently interfaced with the Department of Justice on the review of the Equality Act. We were shocked at one sentence that was given, that one of the reasons they didn't implement Chapter 5 was there was a requirement that local governments should have equality plans. And they said local government should be given an opportunity to play its proper role and not social justice. And I said, God, the Constitution enjoins everyone in government in terms of Section 7.2 to advance human rights for all. And those rights include the right to equality, which is the right to equal enjoyment of all rights and freedom, not just socio-economic rights, the right to enjoy all the rights that are promised in the Constitution, and the right to enjoy other rights, because Section 9.2 is not just about fundamental human rights. It's the right to enjoy all rights. And municipalities have a duty to do that. And therefore, they could be assisted. And one of the devils of municipalities, all of them, is that mayors don't know that they're a mayor for everyone. Just as the president is the president for everyone, including those who didn't vote for them. But I've seen in municipalities where the mayor says they're not servicing a particular ward because it voted for a different party, and therefore it is up to the councillors in that ward to look after them. No, in the Tuma Siyazakela enterprising communities, we say we empower communities to request their equitable dividend, their democratic dividend from the municipal budget, to make sure that that budget goes to everyone. The budget can't be distributed according to who voted for who. But it boils down to that fourth key result area of the social justice plan. Give people in government the ability to lead properly, to lead in a manner that is ethical, purpose-driven, impact-conscious, and committed to serve everyone, regardless of their color, regardless of their gender, regardless of their nationality. And that everyone who governs should govern in accordance to the purposes defined in the Constitution.
Thank you, Professor, and thank you, Deliwi, for your question. There is another question in the chat. If I can just read it out, it's quite long. I'll try and read it slowly. Thank you, Professor Madonsela, for such a fruitful discussion. I'm a grade R teacher and extremely passionate about the social justice curriculum I'm implementing in my school. Any suggestions on how I can walk the journey with the parent body? Not only those who stand to gain for the converted in brackets, but those who in fact do not want to engage in this space. Sorry, the question is from Noluthando Nukuna. Sorry.
Thank you, Noluthando. How wonderful that you asked this question, because one of my colleagues who is involved in the work we're doing on social justice is Andre Scherer, who truly believes in a fair start for every child. That if you're going to have an egalitarian society, if you're going to have a winning nation, the best thing to do is to start investing in a first start for every child. And therefore those grade R and all of those other grades before grade 1 are extremely important, because although neuroscientists now tell us that our brain can be developed until the day we die, but we do know that the most important time for brain development are those first 1,000 years, are those first few years. And therefore you guys who are doing grade R are important. How do you engage parents? I would say if you can at least just follow up with me. Zuleika can give you my cell number. I can link you up with Andre Scherer from the Indaba Foundation. And he has this whole Montessori initiative. This is about teaching, giving a university degree to grade R teachers. Because if you are going to have the best society or one of the best societies in the world, then your people, your humanity can't be poisoned at source, where little children don't learn the right values, they don't learn the right logical skills, and all of the kind of thinking and acting skills that they're supposed to be given at preschool level. And I'm certain that Andre Scherer would be very happy to work with you.
Thank you for that, Professor. I will, Noluthando, I will, if you can put your email in the chat, and I can make a note of your email address and send you Professor's cell phone number. And while you're doing that, let me just see if there are any other questions and chats. Professor, I wonder if I may again pose something, even if it's just to, oh, there is an, Deliwi has a hand up again. Maybe I should let her speak. Deliwi, do you want, is it a, oh, you took your hand down. You don't have another question, Deliwi? Your hand is,
I do.
Okay, pose your question.
Yes. I just wanted to find out, I do agree with the professor that the triple BE is being abused to just really benefit people who are affiliated with, within government, with government officials or politicians. However, we do have still to redress the imbalances of the past. And I know that BEE has been seen to not really being able to do that effectively. Then how do we then level the play field and redress the imbalances of the past? Let's say we do away with BEE. What other means can we be able to do that so that Black people are also brought on the same economic level field as our white counterparts?
Wonderful. Thank you, Deliwa. You ask fantastic questions, and you also give me an opportunity to clarify myself. You are right in saying, although flawed, BEE has dented inequality in some ways. We do have a few. The very fact that we have a Patrice Motsepe today is because of BE. Without Patrice Motsepe, without BE, we would not have a Patrice Motsepe, and various of the other Black billionaires and millionaires that we have today. What I have been saying is that it was not the best vehicle, and it was bound to fail in terms of really addressing the legacy of colonialism and apartheid. Firstly, the legacy of the past is not just Black, it's female as well. So that was one of the mistakes of BE. And I think it is Kimberly Crenshaw who says all Black people are male and all women are white, but some of us are brave. And what he's saying is that a whole lot of your vehicles that redress inequality exclude people who are in the intersectional space. So Black women, for example, under BE, have to be a subsection of Black, although their oppression was specifically as Black women. BE then excludes white women who were excluded because they were women. And even though they benefited from the broader advantages accruing to whiteness, but they were disadvantaged because they're white. And then you come to people with disabilities who were disadvantaged because they were disabled, Black, white, or whatever. Although, of course, those who are Black would have a much more accumulation of disadvantage. So these vehicles like Black economic empowerment don't then take into account the complexity. They also don't understand systems thinking, that you are economically disadvantaged, not because you have only been excluded from getting tenders in government. You are economically disadvantaged because you were stopped from owning wealth. And therefore, if you're going to look for a loan in the bank, you're not going to have collateral. But you're also economically disadvantaged because you're part of an economically disadvantaged community, because they say your social network is your net worth. But for many Black people, your social network is your economic disadvantage. I mean, every month I have people that I'm helping financially. And in terms of education, I've educated my sister's children. I've also paid for total strangers. And my nephew, who I'm proud of, is finally doing his master's degree. I've paid for that. So that's my network, is not my net worth. My network has been a part of what people call black tax, which I don't really like that word. So an approach to empowerment and look at all of the core determinants of social and economic inequality. So education, spatial disparity, the land question, the culture of inequality that was left by the past. That's why with the Equality Act, we included Chapter 5, which required people in government to do an audit of existing forms of inequality and to design an equality plan. Think about it, if the Department of Justice had implemented it, that was 2 decades ago. There would have been a definition of what forms of inequality exist, the multiple dimensions of inequality, and remove it with it, which includes economic empowerment, but not isolating economic empowerment from everything else. So what is the way forward? I do think that an economic inclusion should continue. I don't like the word empowerment, because it reinforces inferiority. Who's empowering who? So I like the word that is used by the Stellenbosch Vice Chancellor and the people in Georgetown University, which is talk about restitutive measures, economic restitutive measures. It does 2 things. One is it runs away for the possibility of reinforcing racism, where you think black people are incapable of doing certain things. They need to be empowered by white people. or women are incapable of doing certain things, they need to be empowered by men and people with disabilities. You talk about these things as restitutive measures. That is one part of the paradigm. But the second part of the paradigm is that you create more vehicles. I spoke about what happened after the 1932 Carnegie Commission report, is that the vehicles that were created for Afrikaners, which are now the APSAs, with the Sambos of this world, etc., they were their vehicles. There wasn't an assimilationist approach. And then, because I think one of the greatest problems with BEE is that it's assimilationist in its outlook. But secondly, one of the weirdest aspects of BEE is that the burdens that are imposed on companies to comply with BEE are racially blind. If you're a woman-owned business, you have to comply with BEE. If you are a black-owned company to comply with BEE. That's why in 1 year, about 3 years ago, the Royal Bafokeng company found itself being less black than Anglo-American. You know, they do the BE ratings. You'll be surprised at how many purely 100% black companies have a lower BE rating than purely white companies that have maybe a 25% black share. So I think the complexity of the BEE is its downfall, and the theory of change behind BEE is unsustainable. So you do need some kind of restitutive measures. Tuma Foundation has something that they call Siyazakela Enterprise and Communities, which places the economic empowerment drive at the community itself using the Sustainable Development Goals, and then brings government as a partner and business as a partner. So business comes in to invest in Black-owned, women-owned, disability-owned, and community-owned enterprises, and then government has to make sure that it delivers the democracy dividend of that particular community. It's a slightly different thing, but what it does is that if it does succeed, it makes sure that no one is left behind, which is the ethos of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which is also the ethos of our Constitution, because when our Constitution says we adopt it to heal the divisions of the past and establish a society founded on democratic values, social justice, and fundamental human rights, where everyone's potential is freed and everyone's life is improved, it means literally no one should be left behind. And therefore, we don't get a Balisa Musa, who was arrested at the age of 12 in 1976, come back now at the height of democracy and say, I don't want this democracy because poverty is placing me at exactly the same disadvantage that past laws under apartheid placed me.
Thank you, Professor. I'm just looking at the chat and to see if there are any more comments and questions. Oh, Richard Sessions has his hand up. Richard, you can pose your question. Richard, I think you should unmute yourself. Richard? Ashley, is Richard unmuted?
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thanks. Tell me, would it not be easier for civil society to more fully participate if something like the Van Zyl-Slabbert Commission of Inquiry into Electoral Reform were implemented? Because then individual legislators would feel more beholden to the public rather than any individual party.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Richard Sessions. You guys are asking excellent questions, and I left that question, but that's another way civil society can get involved. Now that the My Vote Counts case opened up the space for members of civil society to participate in elections at all levels as independents, that's another way you can contribute to the policy-making process. Because people, for example, right now have been asking that the sealed documents of current President Ramaphosa should be opened so that we know who funded him and therefore who is behind his agenda. As Tuma Foundation, we say no. We want to know who's funded everyone, because where South Africa goes, is not determined only by the president. It's determined by everyone who is in government, from local government to senior government. For example, if you look at what has happened now in Parliament, people are more concerned about unsealing those documents. In the meantime, the Department of Justice is busy trying to review the Equality Act. There's no participation from political parties because they're obsessed with things that matter to them. They're not obsessed with things that matter to the average Gogo Dlamini, the average small business person who has been affected by some of these policies, black or white, who have been affected by some of these policies that are not conscious to the social justice dictates of the Constitution. So I do agree, and both at the Social Justice Chair at Stellenbosch University and at the Tuma Foundation, we welcome the possibility of people from civil society going into Parliament. We even offer free training on what we call epic leadership. It firstly just talks to you about democracy and the plasticity of the concept of democracy. If you look at how it has evolved from 5th century Athens to where it is now, and that it also has a potential for further plasticity. And then we also teach people about, if you go into government, you have to be ethical, purpose-driven in your approach, impact conscious, which is about systems thinking mostly, and committed to serve everyone, including the people who didn't vote for you, because as long as there's injustice somewhere, democracy cannot be sustained.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'm just looking at chat. I see. Richard, do you mind taking your hand down? Otherwise, I'm going to think it's a new hand. If you don't have another question. Thank you, Richard. I'm just looking. Okay, there's no more. There isn't. While people are formulating, Professor, I have another question. I'm sorry that I'm posing so many questions. I'm not supposed to. But something that's always been bothering me, if I think about the levels of poverty that we have inherited in a new South Africa, when I think about the Bill of Rights and when it comes to social and economic rights, there's always a clause that somehow for me absolves the state. Whereas when you consider the Bill of Rights in terms of its what we would call traditionally political rights, human rights, it's unmistakably clear the government's responsibility. But when it comes to social economic rights like housing, education, supporting people who cannot support themselves, then it's always the clause, there's always a clause, and I'm quoting here because I've got my little booklet constituted, within the reasonable resources that the state has. Isn't that a bit of a problem in achieving social justice in post-apartheid South Africa? Shouldn't this constitution have made it more clearly in terms of making it obligatory rather than within the state's reasonable resources to see that everybody has, and maybe we wouldn't have had the corruption that we had. It's just something that it's been bothering me. So let me just see, I see there's a hand up. Perhaps you can respond to someone else first. I'm not, let me just see whose hand that is. And maybe you can always deal with I was just trying to encourage discussion. Mady Gray has a hand. If maybe, Mady, you can pose your question. Mady?
Yeah, hi. Good morning. And thank you very, very much, Professor Madonsela. I love your lectures. I listen to them every year at summer school or winter school. And you're always such a refreshing voice. But I have a question. We all know there has been a huge amount of corruption, and part of it is through the patronage system, misuse of the patronage system, could one say. We need people to want to give money, to pay taxes, whatever, or to add to their fees, those who can afford it, in order to create a pool to change things, as you pointed out. But I think there are thousands, if not millions, of people who are very reluctant to do that until corruption is no longer sexy. At the moment, corruption is something that is so much a part of our system that we need a mind change, and we need some of the worst people to be at least prosecuted, if not convicted. And until this is happening in a way that actually reduces corruption, I think it's going to be extremely difficult to find people who are prepared to give generously to build a new reality in South Africa, and this is desperately needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Maddie. What a wonderful question. And that's one of the questions that are posed when we invite people to join us as part of all hands on deck under the social justice plan. They complain that resources are squandered through corruption, and they complain that there is inadequate accountability. And I think that's a fair, very fair complaint. And that is one of the reasons, ma'am, that I ordered government to establish a commission on state capture. The commission was supposed to deal with one major threat to democracy, one major patronage system that, based on the evidence before me then, showed that the president seemed to be a kept president, either directly or through his family. But the Gupta family was in partnership. Every company that was getting state funding and tenders that we call a Gupta company is not really a Gupta company, is a Zupta company, because as soon as President Zuma was appointed as president of the ANC, the Guptas then brought in his son as a partner in all of their businesses, and used him as a South African who qualifies to get state support and who qualifies under BE to get certain opportunities, to get these opportunities for themselves, knowing that they themselves, they might be black because they are Indian, but they don't not black under our laws in terms of BEE, because you're black if you are South African by April 27, 1994. So yes, and I'm giving you just the Zuma corruption allegations as one example of patronage, because that whole then group extended patronage to other people. At least that was the evidence. That the patronage would include, for some people, they wouldn't get tenders, but they would get elevated to ministers, as you saw Minister Van Rooyen rocking up with advisors that have now been confirmed to have been Gupta aligned. If you look at the cases that have involved Trillian and Mackenzie, it's no longer speculation. We know for a fact that those advisors were Gupta associates. So the State Capture Commission is moving forward, and I do think that people will be prosecuted. It was hamstrung by two things. It took a while for it to get appointed because there was resistance to its appointment, which I don't understand, because the commission's job was simply to just get evidence. And then it was also hamstrung by the fact that President Zuma extended its mandate to all manner of corruption. Hence, we got the Agrizi stories and all of the stories that have thrilled us. But the beauty of extending the powers of the commission is that we now have a much broader understanding of the depth of corruption in our system. So this may have been nefariously included, but the positive impact from it is that we have an opportunity to reset on corruption. We have an opportunity to reset the system itself to make sure that it has less chances for people to engage in corruption. We have an opportunity to get back some of the money, not all, because the longer it takes to investigate corruption, which is a crime, the less likely it is that you're going to recover the money, and the less likely it is that you're going to cover all evidence, because, as you know, the crime trail gets colder the longer it takes for you to pursue that particular crime. But people will go to jail. Some of the money will come back. But more importantly, the patronage system is beginning to be disrupted. That's why we got the Zuma Riots, because people can feel the fact that the income streams that were coming from the patronage system have been closed. So those who are concerned that we're not doing enough on corruption, I think hold your horses. Things are happening. People have been complaining that Ms. Patohi has not moved fast enough. And I said this even before she said it herself at the World Anti-Corruption, at the International Corruption Conference. I said this, that if she moves with a half-cooked case, it's worse than doing nothing, because then people get an opportunity to perpetrate the narrative, or to perpetuate the narrative that says that they are being persecuted rather than prosecuted. So it's better to make sure that you only go to court, you only arrest people when you have a watertight case. And we're seeing that happening at this stage. And I would say to people, please pay your tax, because it is a system. Some of the money still does what it needs to do. And if you look at what happened after the PPE scandal, you will agree with me that although what happened is horrible, but the state moved in a very agile way to find out what happened, and to close the taps. So we're getting better at least reacting. And I think there are moves to close the taps. You as civil society also have an opportunity to say what kind of transparency can be introduced into the system that reduces the opportunities for corruption. And I've spoken to government, for example, to say, why not introduce systems such as we have it in my university, for example? There's certain fields you have to include if you are procuring. And if you haven't included that information, you can't move to the next step. So government can do the same thing where the system itself rejects you, unless then you put in wrong information, in which case, of course, that is fraud. But also to make sure that there's transparency. When a tender, people were not happy, for example, on how SAA was sold. Why not tell us when you're about to sell, so that firstly, there's enough people who can come to the party, because then you get really the best party. But two, once it has been concluded, we get to know who got it very early, so that we can quickly be our own protectors and tell if that person is compromised. I do think the system is getting better, but I do agree with you, ma'am, and all other colleagues, that we would have to do better on corruption to pull back the money so that we can fund sustainable development, so that we can also regain trust among the people. But until then, I do think that we should play our part in paying our tax, and two, in connecting our lights to fix the problems that we can fix. The Amanda way. I mean, Amanda was entitled to stay at that garage and throw a tantrum, but she was thinking in a purpose-driven way. It is my job to reach the mountain and to summit the mountain so that the girls can get these sanitary pads. And she did that. And by the way, please, if you go to Discam, please buy some pads and give us. And if you have any opportunity to donate to our Action for Inclusion Fund, please do so, because we did climb a mountain. It's not a joke to summit Kilimanjaro. I've done it twice. And the reason I'm doing it is I'm discharging the burden of privilege. I am privileged because people like Beas Nodia and many others, John Daniel and others, paid for my education. And because of that, I was better placed to play a part in crafting South Africa's constitution. And because of those opportunities that I got in getting involved in the early stages of our society, I was better placed in enjoying some of the low-lying fruits of democracy. So I have a home, I have a paying job, etc. So what do I do to pay it forward? I climbed mountains for social justice. I'm part of the group at Stellenbosch University under the visionary leadership of Professor Wim de Villiers, that is making sure that this time Stellenbosch is not part of the problem, it's part of the solution. So I invite you to do the same.
Oh, thank you, Professor. I'm just looking to see if there are any more. I don't see any more questions or comments, and it is now 3 minutes to 12, and I'm sure you must be exhausted. Yeah, I don't know if I had a question, but it's okay if there's no time.
Can I answer that, ma'am? Sorry, I forgot, and it was a wonderful question about poverty, and I got the sense that you were saying that there isn't enough attention being given to poverty.
No, well, what I said specific, it was very specific to the Constitution, and it's the phrasing of clauses related to
the socio-economic
rights.
Oh yes, now I remember.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, ma'am. I remember that you said that your concern is that the Constitution could have phrased the socio-economic rights clause better, because Section 27 in particular, and it's the same with higher education, is that it ties up progress to resources. For example, Section 27 says everyone has the right to access to healthcare services, including reproductive health care, sufficient food and water, and social security, including, if they are unable to support themselves and their dependents, appropriate social assistance. It says in subsection 2, the state must take reasonable legislative and other measures within its available resources to achieve the progressive realization of each of these rights. And of course, the Constitution, that doesn't then tell us what is a progressive realization and what is available resources. And you will remember the first socio-economic rights case of Grootboom. It didn't achieve much because it said, give us a plan, and it affirmed the right to Mrs. Grootboom to get an RDP house or to get a house, but it didn't say you'll give her a house within this timeline. It just says give us a plan, and Mrs. Grootboom died without a house. But since then, we've now had the TRC and the TAC cases that dealt with access to ARVs, where the courts were a little bit more bolder. They made assumptions about available resources. They said you will provide nevirapine, you must do within these timelines. So what I do think we could have phrased it better. I also think we could have phrased the preamble better. I also think we could have phrased the equality clause better. Those are 3 places. I also think we could have phrased Section 25 better. But having said that, even though we didn't phrase the preamble better, for example, we talk about the injustices of the past, but unlike the Stellenbosch University restitutive statement, we don't talk about the current consequences of the injustices of the past. If you read the Constitution, it talks about the past, but it doesn't tell the reader that the consequences of that unjust past remain with us and we must fix them. With the equality clause, it talks about measures to achieve equality may be taken. It doesn't say must be taken. So that is problematic, but there is a cure if you read the Constitution as a whole. If you read Section 7.2, Section 7.2 is peremptory. Government must advance these rights. Must. Section 237 is very clear in the Constitution. Constitutional responsibilities must be attended to diligently and must be given priority. So if you read the Constitution as a whole, it does cure the defect in Section 27 and in the articulation of the other socioeconomic rights. So what is the problem? The problem lies in educating lawmakers and other implementers of the Constitution on the Constitution. If you look at the Constitutional Court, everything it does, it integrates transformative constitutionalism. It integrates the equality duty in everything it does. But that's not done by every court, and it's certainly not done by government all the time. So what does this mean then? Available resources would mean available resources subject to Section 237, which means if you've spent these available resources giving luxuries to ministers, giving luxuries to civil servants, or to anybody else, you can't say those resources are not available. And this is the debate we're having when we're saying to government, pay the grant. The argument was that we don't have resources for the grant, and we're saying shift resources from some of the luxuries that we are giving to others and push those resources to people. Of course, government finally relented, but it's only giving 350 Rand, which is said we would have wanted government to at least give 560, which is the lower bound poverty line, which is the food poverty line. But a slice of bread is better than no bread at all. So how do we cure the defect? At Stellenbosch University, we've started this project that is called Everyday Justice, where we will teach people starting with the preamble. And so watch out for our mascot, which is called Loli. We will be teaching people about everyday justice and also teaching those in government that you have a duty to advance these socioeconomic rights, even though the Constitution says within available resources. It means within available resources in the broader cake of government, not after you have given luxuries to others. It means before you give luxuries, please comply with Section 9(2) of the Constitution, Section 7(2), and Section 237 and Section 195 of the Constitution. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you. I think I need to reread those sections again. Thank you very much, Professor. I'm just double checking if there are no last minute questions or comments. Okay, they are just thanks. Okay, I don't see any other questions or comments, and it is 4 minutes past 12. And I just want to thank you so much for making this time to lecture at our winter school. Thank you very, very much. And to all the participants for posing your questions and for participating in our winter school. And to Ashley, thank you very much. Without Ashley, I don't think we would have executed this webinar so perfectly. Ashley is responsible for the technical logistics, but more than that. And we know that the young student generation, they are far more adept at negotiating the modern digital world than those of us who are a bit older. So thank you, Ashley, and thank you to the participants. And Professor, thank you very, very much. It was a really very engaging discussion and a lot of food for thought. Thank you so much. I don't know if you have any final comments you want to make.
I just want to thank you, colleague, and the colleagues that have been part of this. It was a huge privilege for me. I also gained something from the insights because learning is a two-way process. And I do again invite all of you to continue to do the great work that you're doing in advancing social justice so that the stable and peaceful society the Constitution seeks to build becomes a reality, particularly in the next 5 to 10 years. Because the Ethiopians say when spider webs combine, they can tie up a lion. So let's tie up the lion, that is poverty, inequality, and racial polarization. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. And thank you very, very much.
Zuleika, can I just borrow you for one moment?
Yes, sure. Thank you, Professor. Okay, at the conclusion of the session.
Yeah, just want to quickly tell you something.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Professor.
everybody. Goodbye. Goodbye, Professor.
Bye.